Yes, and instead of asking you to put in the chat where you're calling in from this time, I would like to know how old were you when you started the harp? Mm. I started when I was 14 and I went to a school that had a harp. I had taken lots of piano prior to that, but the students that I have coming to me now that are 9, 10 years old, I'm very envious that they have the opportunity to start younger. So, yeah, some more teenagers. 49, love it.
All right, Nell. Good. Good for
Absolutely
you.
love it.
Yeah, great.
That's great. Well, welcome to admitting more people to the Harp Teachers Gathering. Again, always grateful to Mary for launching this community and for Melody's Traditional Music in Houston for their sponsorship. So we appreciate that. We've got a wonderful presenter coming today, or who is here today to be with us and talk about methods. Rachel Green is a harpist and pianist in Tucson, Arizona. She received a performance degree in harp and piano from the University of Northern Colorado. For her doctorate, she studied under Carol McLaughlin at the University of Arizona. Rachel's teaching method, which is Play With Me, is published by her company, Happy String Music. Rachel also publishes new high quality editions of standard harp repertoire, as well as compositions of contemporary teachers. So, Rachel has a wonderful way of balancing her teaching with a beautiful family life, including her husband and her 4 children. And we're glad she could take the time to be with us today. She's got some wonderful things to talk about. So I'm Kimberly DeRosa. I'm going to hand it over to Rachel now so that she can get everything in.
Thank you for having me. I've prepared a slideshow, so I'm going to go ahead and share that with you, and we'll dive in talking about harp methods. Okay,
And Mary, could you share that again in our chat?
Yes, I will. What I'm going to be sharing is her slideshow, right? Right.
yes.
Okay. I will find that quick here. Okay, here it comes.
Thank you.
There it is. You should see it, everybody. Okay, Rachel, I think that they've got it, and I think that you can continue. Thank you.
Great. So harp methods, how to use and choose them. Let's think about what is a harp method. What's its goal? What does it look like? But first, I'm actually going to take you on a brief tour of piano methods because they have inspired my work. There are well over 30 piano methods in the piano world. It's absolutely amazing how much material they have. And I've picked a couple on this chart. These are the ones I use in my own teaching studio, so they're my favorites. Very small sampling. And what I wanted to point out is that a method has a target audience. And you can see the various target audiences of these piano methods. Music for Little Mozarts, published by Alfred, is designed specifically for very young students. They say 4 to 6 years old. This is actually the only one I haven't used because I prefer to teach slightly older students. Good for you if you are one that will tackle a 4-year-old boy. But this is a well-reviewed, highly recommended method should you find yourself teaching a young student. Next, another type of method is chord-based learning with popular tunes. Not everyone wants to dive into classical music right when they're starting, or maybe they never even want to reach those pieces. They want to be able to play tunes that they've heard And chord-based learning is also great for adults who can already have this strength in their fingers to play chords, and they also want to be able to learn a handful of chords and then be able to play a lot of the tunes that they learned growing up. Our next category is a basic curriculum for your average student. This is where my method, Play With Me, falls, and it's where I have a handful of piano methods for you to browse through. And I wanted to point out that even within the same category, a curriculum will still have a target audience within that based on its strengths. And so for piano, Alfred's method has a particularly helpful approach to rhythm. If you find yourself with a student that is weak in that area, perhaps this would be a good option for them. Succeeding at the Piano by Helen Marlays has a beautiful format. Just the page is not cluttered, it's well designed, and you can imagine a student that just appreciates how it looks on the page. The basic technique is also well explained. Piano Adventures by Faber and Faber. For some reason, kids love the pieces in this method. They are excited to learn them, and they really enjoy the fun titles and creative lyrics. Piano Safari is a slightly different approach. It's half rote and half reading. And this is great if a student wants to sound cool or wants to sound impressive, even from their first lessons. They don't want to play just 3 notes in their piece. And I like this approach because it does teach reading as well, but the rote pieces allow those students to sound really impressive right from their first lesson. So, multiple options for your basic curriculum for your average student. Then you also have methods geared specifically towards older students or students with a musical background that will progress more quickly. One example is Succeeding at the Piano, All-in-One Approach by Helen Marlays. Oh, I see somebody does teach the 4-year-olds. Good for you. Okay, so there's these various approaches, but there are some characteristics that all of these successful methods share. And I'd like to go through those with you. I've listed 3. The first is a systematic sequencing of new concepts. When thinking about systematic sequencing of new concepts, we have to think in terms of micro levels of difficulty. What's the smallest difference in difficulty between one piece or the next? And how might a beginner student view that difference? As a small, easy to learn difficulty difference, or does that feel like a big step for them? Let's do a couple of exercises to think about micro levels of difficulty for note reading, rhythm, and technique. Here are 2 examples I just created for this exercise, and I'll give you a moment to just look and see if you can put into thoughts what makes, I'll give you the hint, A is harder. What makes A harder than B? Here are some considerations. Think about which pitches are included and which pitches your student knows. In B, there's a total of 3 different pitches, middle C, F, and F. While in A, there are 12 different pitches. Notation can also add a level of difficulty. In A here, these notes are not hard, they're right around middle C, but notated in the bass clef for the right hand adds a layer of difficulty, as does the ledger line. Also think about the density of notes, or how many notes are being played at a time. We see just 1 note at a time in B, and then we're moving to multiple notes at a time towards the end here. And then finally, think about the intervals. what the student has to place or what they're actually playing at the same time. And you'll notice multiple intervals in our example A here. So let's, as our exercise, think exactly how many levels of difficulty are there between these two. It's not an exact science, but I'm just creating this as a way to think through more precisely how many pieces you would need for a student to learn to get from one level to the next. So in terms of pitches, suppose that doubling the number of pitches was a level of difficulty. Well, so from 3 to 6 pitches would be one level, and then from 6 to 12 would be another. So I gave that a score of 2 levels of difficulty for pitches. For notation, we mentioned the bass clef and the ledger lines, so I gave that 2. For density of notes, we went from 1 note at a time to 2 notes at a time. So that is a level of difficulty. And then for intervals, I gave that 4 levels of difficulty because every new interval a student learns requires new muscle memory. And so we have a third, a fourth. If you place the left hand, you would have a fifth here, as well as a sixth at the end. So I like to think of it as 9 micro levels of difficulty of difference between these two. And if I were finding a pattern like this in a method, I would expect to find 9 pieces that are focused on teaching reading in between them. But of course, there will be more than 9 pieces because note reading is not the only thing you're teaching the student. You'll have pieces focusing on rhythm and technique mixed in there as well. So to summarize, I would expect excerpt B to be found in a primer level book, while excerpt A would best fit early on in a level 2. And like I mentioned, the goal is not to get the right answer, but to give us a framework to where when we see any piece, we can fit that piece in our framework and understand the difficulty level. So let's move on to rhythm, a similar exercise. What makes one of these harder than the other? Okay, let's talk about it. Well, to start with, we can look at the basic rhythmic value. Quarter notes versus eighth notes. And this is actually not a micro level of difficulty. Going from quarter notes to eighth notes is one of the biggest leaps our early students do. And I have not seen eighth notes in piano methods at level 1. It takes a lot of preparation to bring students from the point of counting beats to subdividing and feeling those divisions. And so that automatically puts a pretty big difference in level between these two. But there's more. We want to consider small rhythmic patterns. A small rhythmic pattern would be typically 1 or 2 measures long. And if you see it repeating, that will make it easier for the student, versus if every small rhythmic pattern changes, that adds a layer of complexity. So in our example A, we have 2 separate small rhythmic patterns, our quarter, quarter, half, and our half, half. Versus in B, there's no pattern. Every measure has a different rhythm in it. And then similarly for large rhythmic patterns, that would be typically 4 or maybe 8 measures long. Having those patterns also makes it easier for the student. Notice how measures 1 and 2 repeat in measures 3 and 4 in A, versus in B, once again, there's no pattern. And then this comment I put in parenthesis is something you want to take note if you're looking at music for 2 hands. You also want to think about how the rhythm in the right hand lines up with the rhythm in the left hand, and does that make it harder or not? So with all of these changes, I would associate A with a level 1 piece, but B here is pretty tricky. I would put it solidly in a level 3, especially if the left hand is playing anything. So our third exercise for technique. Think about the various aspects of technique that make one of these excerpts harder. Okay, first of all, we have finger patterns. How many fingers are you placing and what specific pattern? B, 4-note scale, up and down. Versus A, we have 3 separate placement patterns. The first group placing just a 3 and then back up to 1. And this 4-note pattern, the regular scale, is far easier than this, looks similar on the page, but one that spans a 6. And that's partially because it is more common in music. So students have simply played it more times and they have developed the muscle memory. Versus a shape like this, it's not much different, but the student does need that extra muscle memory to know where to place the thumb. Next, let's think about the exact shape. We actually kind of were diving into that already. And then in this case, going from a 1 to 3, it's a funny pattern because you have to tuck the second finger. And so often students have that second finger get in the way. So having to tuck a finger adds a layer of difficulty in this spot in the middle. So the exact shape that you're placing, and then leaps. Leaps are another thing that are not difficult to accomplish. A student can find the note, especially in this case it's a red string, so it's easy to find. But even so, leaps take your student's attention away from the music score and they have to look at the harp in order to get that note. And this is a skill for students to be able to go back to their music after finding their note and find the spot that they were. So once again, not technically difficult, but if you have a leap in your music, it makes the piece more difficult for your student because of the eyes shifting back and forth. Another thing to think about if you have a piece you're analyzing is what special techniques are included, if there's harmonics, PDLT, hands getting right close next to each other. We want to consider all of these when thinking about our technique. So for example B, I would expect to find it either late in a harp primer or early in level 1. This is a basic pattern. Well, this example A would probably be best late in a level 2 or even early in level 3, depending on what the left hand is doing. So here is a piece, a sample pedagogical piece from my harp method Play With Me. It is called Rainy Day from Level 1. And I'll play it for you and then we'll talk about its pedagogical goal. Okay, so for rainy day, there are two main things the student is learning. And they're both technique things in this piece. Voicing in the left hand, with the left hand bringing out these accents, and then placing that 3-note arpeggio. Students have been prepared for this piece. They've played dynamics, so they've practiced playing louder and softer, but it is new for them to play loud in one hand and then immediately softer in the second hand. And they've also played a 3-note arpeggio before, but it is new for them to be back to back, allowing the student to get practice relaxing, squeezing, and releasing between each grouping. Notice what this piece does not have. It does not have complicated rhythm or complicated notes. The notes are simple and repetitive. Remember, pieces should include 1 to 2 hard skills for a method designed for your average learner. A method for a more accelerated pace maybe would include 3 to 4 new micro levels of difficulty. But for this method, we're aiming for 1 to 2, and we used them up. Those were voicing and placing. And so the rest of the piece was designed to keep the rhythm simple and the notes simple as well. At this level, even changing the rhythmic pattern does count as a hard skill. Or if in the right hand I move the arpeggio up and down, that would also count as a new layer of difficulty. Adding complexity rather than teaching the students more things, it actually diverts their attention away from being able to focus and master a particular skill. And one of the reasons I think we have so few pieces in general at level 1 in the harp repertoire is the tendency, our natural tendency, to include a lot of fun musical things in our pieces. And a harp method creates a system for introducing the concepts that allows the students to tackle one new skill at a time. Students develop confidence with each new aspect of music, and they're more likely to learn correctly the first time, allowing them to progress faster. So that is our first characteristic of a successful method. The second characteristic is the inclusion of teacher duets. You will find these universally in any piano method you pick up or really any instrument, and I'm glad to see more and more entering the harp world. I valued them so much, I chose to include one for every piece in my method, and you'll see why. I'm going to first play Medieval Knight for you, and then we'll talk about the role of a teacher duet and what students learn from it. Let me find, aha. I'm going to play the student's right hand as well as the teacher's left hand, teacher's part, which actually incorporates all the students' left hand notes as well. So you're getting a sense of what the piece sounds like put together. I got almost all the teacher parts. Okay. Teacher duets develop a student's musicianship as a whole, so basic skill of helping them play evenly. They also help a student's ensemble skills, as it requires them to listen and then count off before playing together. Duets help a student's ear by allowing the student to hear new rhythms and harmonies that they've not encountered in their own music before. This is especially important in the early levels where students are playing one note at a time. We want their ear to start hearing those harmonies earlier on than they're actually playing them in their own music. And also, the duets give our students performance skills for anything they're going to play in life, whether it's solo or in an ensemble. A super important aspect of playing music is keep on going no matter what happens and smile at the end. And we can have our students practice that with the teacher duets. Notice that the teacher part does not have to be complex. In this case, it was just a repeating pattern. And teacher parts are actually more successful when they're simple. That way the teacher can sight read it and keep their full attention on how their student is playing while they're playing along. For this piece specifically, the student is learning a few new finger patterns, and the tendency is to slow down. And this is what's new for the student, and it's quarter notes. The teacher part pushes them to maintain the tempo and keep it steady. And the teacher part is also introducing the student to this dotted half quarter rhythm. At this point in the method, the student has not encountered dotted notes before, but here's a way for the student to learn what they sound like, and then when they encounter this rhythm in their own music later on, it will be familiar and easy for them to learn. So it's important to have a systematic sequencing of new events, include those teacher duets, and then also beautiful aesthetics. Aesthetics are a key characteristic of successful methods because they provide students with intrinsic motivation, meaning that they practice not because their parents set a timer, but because they enjoy the whole process, from looking at their music to figuring out how to play it. Music that is easy to read is more enjoyable. That's true for me too, especially if you hand me an orchestra ensemble part. And having a curriculum with pleasing aesthetics can give your students a boost in their learning as well. Here I've typeset the same piece 2 different ways. So the notes are the same, but the second one just looks more fun or looks easier. Let's think about the differences. One is simply the font size. Making the font size a little bit bigger and breaking it up onto 2 lines instead of 1 makes it so much easier to read. And then I've included fingerings and brackets for consistency. I found with my students that they often don't know or they're not aware if they use a different fingering. If they got the right note and the right rhythm, they're super excited about that. And you're like, oh, can you do that again? But let's use this fingering. And especially in this early level 1 level, I like to include fingerings the first time a pattern is introduced, and that will help the student practice consistently with the same fingering every time. But if the pattern repeats itself, I will leave off the fingerings, allowing them the opportunity to apply what they learned in the previous measure. And then notice how the artwork adds a special touch. Young students are often intimidated by new pieces, and if they look at a piece and think, that's too hard for me, you'll get a negative pulling back reaction. But if they see a fish and a castle, that will take their mind off of what might be hard and makes them excited to tackle a new piece. So we've discussed about what successful methods look like, and you can think through the materials you use and use those rubrics to help find pieces that are appropriate for your student. Let's move on then and discuss how to use a method. And the first step is think through what materials you have and pick a method. Is your student more interested in folk tunes or classical pieces? And how quickly do you anticipate that they will learn new concepts? These will inform your choice. A harp method can make your life a lot easier as a teacher, but it does not take away your job. A harp method should inform us what's new for a student in a particular piece, and we can then prepare our students to learn those concepts. And let me show you what I mean. Here is a piece from my Play With Me Level 2 called Baby's Lullaby. I'll play it for you, and then we'll discuss how you might prepare your student to learn this piece.
So Rachel, I have a quick question.
Yes.
I noticed that one has 3 flats. At which level do you start introducing different key signatures with lever changes or pedal changes?
I introduce new key signatures in the primer in just a few pieces, but not the student changing levers in the middle of a piece until level 3, I'm pretty sure. And if I had to do it again, I might, for this simple reason that a couple of Suzuki teachers have been in contact with me that have said, I love your method, but we don't change levers that early on. So just to make it more universally applicable, I liked the idea of students becoming more familiar with different note patterns, like a chord looks one way on C and it looks a different way on G. It's all white strings all of a sudden. So I did include a couple of pieces in those other keys for that reason, but my Suzuki friends have told me they just skip those pieces and that works as well for when they're using the method.
Yeah, some of my early students, I have their harps tuned to C, and some of them don't even have levers. So I was just wondering, what your perspective was with that, which makes sense. It just makes it, I guess, a little less daunting and a little more acclimating to the geography of the harp itself. So thank you.
Yeah, benefits both ways, and it does depend on what type of harp you have. In levels primer and 1, the vast majority are in the key of C, but I do include a couple of others. Okay, so in Baby's Lullaby, the 2 main things your student is learning are these variety of rhythm patterns in your right hand, as well as this is the very first time a student is encountering the interval of a sixth. So let's think about how to prepare a student to learn this piece. Here's example exercises. One would be to identify measures with the same rhythmic pattern. And I'm a huge fan of making a copy of the music, getting out those markers, cutting it up, matching it, so that your student can place in the same pile the measures with the same rhythm, or they see them in the same color. So some activity, and they would discover there are 3 rhythmic pattern, small, so we're talking 1 measure length, in this piece. So we have this first pattern, eighth dotted half, the second one, and then this random one in the middle. So have your student notice, oh, actually it's only 3 patterns. It looks so complicated. Actually, I only have to learn 3 patterns, and I can get comfortable with what each of these sounds like. So a step to do that would be to clap the rhythms, counting out loud, and make sure your student's counting with you out loud. They like to let you do all the counting. And then another fun game you could play is to play random notes, any notes the student wants on the harp, but using the rhythm of the right hand. Once again, we're locking into this rhythm before we're looking at notes or anything else. For the left hand, we can start by identifying them. The student is fairly comfortable with the 5th step. They've seen some 4ths before. And then noticing how this 6th is 1 step bigger than a 5th. So just looking at the various intervals. A good exercise would be to keep the top note B flat, and then the teacher calls out an interval, 3rd, and the student plays it on the harp. So they are always keeping the top note as B flat, and then they're changing the interval. And then another game, this is my ultimate go-to game for everything new muscle memory related. I call it the place, check, play game. So it will apply to intervals, any new shape of any chord, no matter how many notes. The first step is with looking at the harp, place the interval you intend, make sure it's right. If it's right, play it, and if it's not, first fix and then play. And then the second step of this game is to place without looking. And that's what develops the student's muscle memory for that new shape. So without looking at the harp, the student places anywhere they want. Suppose they're finding a 6th. Check. That's an important step, because if it's not right, we don't want to reinforce it. And then if it is correct, have the student go ahead and play both notes together to get that muscle memory they need for the new interval. And so you as the teacher can prepare your students. They'll go home, they can do these exercises, and then when they go to play the piece, they will learn it correctly and successfully the first time, which is our goal. Third step in using a method, discover how well your student knows each concept. And this is something we constantly do. So with everything your student is playing, we want to listen, is the student's rhythm even and confident, or are there hesitations or fluctuations? For note reading, a great way to check in with your students on their note reading is just to ask them to start playing in the middle of their piece. You know they know the notes, but if they can't start anywhere, that's probably because they are slow at looking at the piece and figuring out which note it is. So that's a great exercise just to include in your regular teaching, to have a student continue to think about their note reading even after they've learned a piece or while they're working on it. And then also just keep track, how long did it take them to learn the piece? For level 1, I aim for a student to spend no more than 3 weeks on a piece. 2 to 3 is probably the golden amount. 1 is probably too easy for them. And if they're spending 6 weeks on one piece, there's probably a skill you want to go back and reinforce at these early levels. And then the higher up you go, then the more time you spend on a piece. Once the student is in level 3, perhaps they spend 2 to 3 months polishing a recital piece.
And
So
what is the commitment you're asking or agreement that you have with the student as far as how much they're practicing? Do you have like an assignment book? Do you ask them to practice a certain amount of time, or just, a certain number of repetitions? What is your approach with that?
when a student's signing up for lessons, I say generally I expect half an hour practice a day because people like a number. And just so that they can look at their schedule in general and see if they have the time for it. And after that, I don't mention time again. I will give a student a specific goal. I want to send them home with whatever amount we successfully covered in lesson is an appropriate amount for them to practice at home. And I like to give required assignments, and then I always have a bonus one. So if a student was playing Baby's Lullaby, here, I'll stop my share for a minute. I have my piece here. If they were playing Baby's Lullaby, we went through those rhythm exercises and then we started looking at it in lesson, and they only made it up to here with me as far as actually playing the notes together. Then I would say next week, I'm going to hear lines 1 to 4. We have some repeat coming up, so actually you only have 2 more measures to learn. Those are our bonus measures for this week. So I'll give them an assignment that I know they can do based on what we actually did it in lesson, and they're reinforcing what I taught. And then I'll always give them a bonus of something that if they want to learn, they can, but they know that I'm not expecting them to. And guess what? Students love impressing you because you're always surprised when they do it. And that gives them the motivation to do that bonus part as well. Okay, so that's for note reading. For muscle memory, often this is the cause of note errors rather than a note reading problem, especially if there's a leap or a new shape. And so we can just evaluate with that exercise I gave you, or just noticing, see if you can identify when a student does make a note error. Is it a note reading error or is it a muscle memory error? And you'll know which one to work on. We also want to be aware of our students' ear training. How well do they hear the music they're playing? And here's an exercise I like to do. After playing through the piece, can your student identify their own errors? And at first, often they can't. They'll be like, I know it wasn't perfect, but where did I mess up? And so if you tell them, okay, play it again, and you're going to have to tell me which measure we want to work on, just knowing that I'm going to ask that will make them listen better as they play. So that's one way we can develop our students' ear training and be in touch with how well they're listening to their music. And then finally, musicality. Did the student pick an appropriate tempo and create a mood? So often we think, well, I'm going to teach notes and rhythm, and then when they're more advanced, then they'll be expressive and creative. Nope. We want them to have that musicality from the very first lesson. And so this is a reminder to ourselves to check in with, did our student pick an appropriate tempo? Did they create a mood? Are they expressing themselves even with these very simple pieces? So we want to discover how well our student knows each concept. And then my final step is supplement the main method with sight reading and other exercises, other pieces. Here are some reasons to supplement. Students may need extra reinforcement for a particular concept. You probably don't have any students like this, but occasionally I get one that doesn't practice as much. And those students, they still may love harp, they're just busy or whatever other reason, and from time to time they may need a little extra reinforcement. But secondly, students should play pieces at different levels. The main method is designed to be the baseline for your student, but they should play pieces that are easy for sight reading practice and then also to expand their repertoire. And I especially enjoy sending kids home with easier pieces around Christmas or whatever special holiday. I don't want them to spend the majority of their time on these pieces, but it is fabulous for them to just learn anything at an easier level. They're playing extra notes, they're reinforcing rhythms, and allowing them to learn a piece on their own is a separate skill that's good for them to develop. And then from time to time, with the right student, it's okay for them to play pieces above their level. This should not be what they do every week, but you'll find a student come in and say, I really want to play this piece. And you're like, you're not ready for it. But you look at it and you're like, well, maybe they can do it. And you let them, and they push really hard, and it may never be perfect, but it gave them such joy and motivation that they worked extra hard and practiced extra hours that it was actually a really good move on your part to let them play that piece, and they were able to grow. So when you use a method, don't be locked into it. Give your students easier pieces and harder pieces. And then finally, supplemental pieces allow you as the teacher to stay closely aligned with your own personal teaching philosophy. Each one of us will have a different philosophy. And so you can use a method, but see something that you want to emphasize more and supplement for that. Here's an example. I don't introduce a lot of hand crossing in my method until level 2. And the reason for that is my emphasis on my reading approach. I want students to understand everything on the page. So from the very first piece and every piece after, the student understands every pen mark. And due to that, I don't include a lot of hand crossing until later on. But technically, this is a really good skill for students to learn. And so as a teacher, you could either teach your students arpeggio warm-ups that include hand crossing, or go out and get Suzanne McDonald's graded recital pieces and supplement the method with other pieces that allow you as a teacher to pick what you want your student to learn. Okay, I will save time for questions. You've heard a number of pieces from my method. I gave you a chart and key points about my philosophy in case you were curious about my method in particular. I'll spend 2 minutes on these and then I'll ask for questions. It's a pre-staff reading approach. Students start off this clef and then halfway through primer, go on the clef. Only second finger for all those pieces. The counting approach. First, students count individual note values before counting beats in a measure. So half, quarter, quarter would be counted 1, 2, 1, 1. And then eventually they transition to counting 1, 2, 3, 4. Intervallic approach to reading. And this is the most common approach in the piano world these days. Starting with a second to allow the student only to look at whether the note's going up or down. Moving to a third. They can see, are the notes right next to each other or does it skip? And then 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. A student does not even encounter a 6th until level 2, as we saw. For my particular method, I chose up to 2 micro levels of difficulty in each piece, and they're listed in the table of contents, so you as a teacher know how to introduce them to your students. I include teacher duets, and I provide extra resources for both teachers and students. Always more on the way. I have a teaching video series for level 1 where I share more tips like I did with Baby's Lullaby. I have a video for each piece in level 1 sharing teaching tips. Supplemental books include theory and activity books with those extra exercises for note reading, rhythm, ear training, sight reading. Supplemental repertoire, Christmas folk songs, a collection of rounds, and videos is my latest project. I would like for a student to be able to hear a piece played by an advanced harpist to inspire their own musicality and phrasing and taking time and all the beautiful musical things we do, I'd like to provide videos for students to be able to hear some of those. And my first project on that will be published in a few weeks. Here's a chart for you to take home and look at, just if you're curious, big picture, what's introduced in each level. You can become familiar with what's taught at the level 1, level 2, level 3. And if you have questions, here's my email. Please follow up, and I'd be happy to continue the discussion.
Thank you so much, Rachel. This is just so well thought through, and such a nice presentation for us today to just really understand and see how you've broken everything down. If anyone does have questions, either in the chat or you can come off mute, just since we've got Rachel here. Does anybody have any questions? Darren says very nicely organized. Thank you.
I have one question for
Yes.
Dr. Rachel. What age do you consider the ideal age to start a harp in general? Obviously, they're child prodigies, but in general, what's the best age you have found?
My favorite is when a child can read. That's my guideline. When they can read English is when their brains have developed to notice how characters are different, how lines are different. And that's my personal favorite. And that tends to be around age 8. So 7, 8, 9 is when I enjoy starting students. But
I taught a lot of piano in the past, and I found that was also true.
Mhm.
And I had some 5-year-olds, kindergartens, who were already reading English.
right.
So
So
it's
the
really
reading,
the reading seemed to be the main criterion that determined whether they were going to be successful taking piano or not. If they weren't yet reading anything, it was an exercise in frustration for both the student and myself.
and you can write things like RH and they remember right hand. It makes so many
Right.
things easier.
Charlotte comments that you have made your instruction books interesting by using non-standard harmonies. I'm glad to see your systematic process of teaching musical skills. Let's see, does anyone have a good way to do duets with online lessons? So I know before we opened up the platform today, you had mentioned to me that you do quite a few online lessons. You have been doing that for a number of years. Do you attempt to do any duets online? Is there any approach that you can suggest with that?
I have not found playing on my end to work with playing on their end. I was fortunate with the online students I have right now because there are 2 of them, they're sisters, and I make them play together. So that's kind of how I get around it in this case. I have tried, well, that's another impetus for creating recordings because it's not exactly the same, but it gives you some of the skills to play along with a recording. So I'd like to make that resource out there. But otherwise, yeah, that's one thing that you can't do quite as well remotely.
Okay. And do you have exam points or any kind of accountability along the way through your books?
I don't yet. Um,
That was one of the questions in the
yeah.
chat. So Elaine, who I might do the RCM, I'm not sure. Just lots of thanks. Do you think a harp student should have piano lessons first? Is that something that you try to require with your incoming students, or is that negligible?
I do not require that. And with the approach to reading that I have in my curriculum, I actually enjoy a student when they're brand new and fresh. I think a piano background is valuable, and I recommend it as a beneficial thing. I had a piano background before I started harp, but I don't require it. I think that students can, it just takes a little longer to familiarize yourself with the staff and where the notes are. But you have to do that on one instrument or another. And it does work well on the harp.
If you have a student that is coming from a piano background or can at least read a fairly basic notes and rhythms, and I know it varies from student, this is kind of a tough question, but I'm assuming you would skip the primer level and maybe consider starting them at a level 1 or 2 because you still need them to develop the skills and the interval spacing and that sort of thing. How do you handle those who have a little bit of reading background?
Right. It depends exactly how far along they are, but I would probably still start with the primer, even if I spent 3 weeks on it, and send them home with 5 pieces a week to play and play the duets with them, and they'll have a blast. But it's important in terms of technique to start with that second finger to develop the habit of closing, habit of releasing. So their note reading might be advanced, but I want their technique to catch up.
Yeah.
And so I still want to give them a couple weeks just to get familiar with playing one note at a time before they start playing 2 notes at a time. And then I want them to learn technique in the systematic order. So I don't want them to just dive into 3 fingers. I want them to do a couple pieces with just 2, couple pieces with 1 and 2. When that's solid, then make it to 3. Even if their reading was more advanced, I don't know of a student that says, this piece is too easy to read, I want a new one. Normally they're like, this is so much fun. And they're like, okay, well, it'll become harder later, but enjoy it right while it lasts. So they enjoy, especially when they're just starting. It's exciting.
Great. Great.
I have a
Everybody's just enjoying this. Yes,
I have
Mary.
a quick question. How do you structure your lessons? Do you ever go rogue and spend an entire 30 minutes on one thing if the kids are really getting into it? Or do you make sure that you have, 5 minutes on this, 10 minutes on that, whatever?
I go rogue. You put it exactly right.
I do
And
too.
that's a personality thing. I don't want to do the same thing every lesson. That's my personality. I will start with a scale for warm up just to settle in, and I'll do the minimum technique I'll do is 1 scale. But then I'll see where the lesson takes us. If with beginner students, we do a lot of off the bench activities, meaning not at the harp. So you might be clapping or you play while they clap. It depends on their level too. So with beginners, you're constantly changing the activity versus an older student, more advanced, will be able to focus and sit there and play the whole time. But I constantly think, what does the student need help with? And I just go in that direction, however much of the lesson that takes.
Thank you.
And how many levels do you have at this point?
Primer 1, 2, and 3.
Are
So
you
4 levels
planning
up to level 3.
are you planning on developing that further, or are you going to stay with those levels?
I am not planning to go further. Those levels are the time where a student is developing skills systematically. After that point, and even in level 3, the order does not matter as much. So whether a student learns how to play a harmonic first, or PDLT, or a trill, they're more separate skills that don't have to be taught in a sequential order. And so after level 3, there are so many pieces that we already have in the harp repertoire, and you can kind of just pick one for your student based on their interests. Do they want a fast one, slow one, chords? So the ordering is not important at that level. The primer, level 1, level 2 is where students can progress more consistently if they encounter rhythms in that particular sequence.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've figured out a way to really lay down a very solid foundation on all aspects. So, Dr. Rachel Green, we thank you for joining us today. Mary, do we have any discounts that we're offering?
Yeah, on the email that I sent out, there's 15% off, and I forget how long it goes till, but all of her music has a discount on it. And it says so in the email, but I will also reinforce that in the follow-up. And then I'll answer these RCM questions in the follow-up and the ABRSM. I'll answer those questions in the follow-up because I've just looked some of that stuff up, so I have those answers.
Great, thank you. Do you remember what the promo code is for the discount?
I do.
What is it?
Play with me.
Thank you.
Great, great. Well, thank you again. Do you have any final words for us, Rachel? We just really appreciate your time and your sharing.
Yeah. Well, my final comment would be I am always learning as a teacher as well. And if you are someone who uses my materials and finds something that works well or doesn't work as well, always get in contact with me and I would love to hear from you.
Thank you so much. All
Thank you,
right,
everybody.
everybody. We look forward to seeing all of you next month.
With
Thank
Nancy
you again.
Harrell.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rachel.
Mhm.